Thanks for joining us again on Spill the Tea. This is in celebration of Asian Heritage Month. I'm Monica.
And I'm Una. Our next topic will be people seeking Asian therapists, um, looking for an Asian therapist, or why choose one or the other, someone who looks like you or someone who doesn't. Lastly, we have the Asian Canadian experience, where we'll be chatting about navigating life as an Asian Canadian, the struggles of being Asian Canadian, conversations with relating to parents, considering the generational and cultural gap, and interracial dating.
I love that you're calling out that there are certain specifics, whether it's religion, language, cultural background, that can change the connection and the relationship that you have with your therapist and with therapy.
Mhm.
And I think that's something that's important for people to consider when they're looking for a therapist, regardless of their background, their heritage, or their culture. But in speaking about Asian therapists, things to consider would be like, would you want your therapist to be very similar to you? So, for example,
Mhm.
I'm Canadian born, second generation or one and a half generation Canadian. It's always, you know,
There's
there's
too
a
much
hot
math, but
debate. There's a hot debate on the generations, but I'm the firstborn or Canadian born, so technically second generation Chinese Canadian, my parents being the first. Would I want also a Canadian born Chinese therapist that would understand some of the challenges of growing up from the get go, just like you were
Mhm.
baptized from the get go into the religion or into this Canadian culture? Or would I want someone who is maybe has immigrated and has some stronger roots to my heritage? Language is another thing.
Mhm.
What has been actually really exciting in my own personal therapy work with an Asian therapist, as well as my clients who are Asian Canadian, is to be able to speak Cantonese. Because there's some things that you just like, it gets lost in translation,
Of
or it's
course.
just like really makes sense in Cantonese.
I
Um,
have that too. I think there's like, when there's no English word for it, it just means its own thing. And it's possible. There's a lot of words, I'm sure, that there's just not an English translation and you just can't express it. Sometimes there's that word. I don't know specifically one, but there's one and it basically means like it's beautiful. I don't know how to translate it, but it's a Filipino word and it basically means like love for them, but it's not like romantic love.
mm,
And it's kind of just a mutual love, and I don't know how to express it in English. And it's so beautiful to hear it in that language and someone
yeah.
that understands and feels that way. It's really great to understand with that
Can you
language
can
barrier.
you share what that word is?
I don't know how to say it properly. I don't want to butcher
Oh.
it. If- For anyone who listens that's Filipino and hears it, they're like, "Oh, that was horrible."
Well, if there's anyone listening who's Filipino who speaks
Who
Tagalog who
knows?
knows this word, drop it in the comments below.
That's another thing too. I wasn't born in Canada, but I was born in Singapore. And I think I was only there honestly for like 2 or 3 years because if you're born in Singapore, your parents have to be Singaporean, otherwise you can't stay in Singapore, which I never knew. But it's so small, so they really have to control their population, and I guess that's why. So we moved straight to Canada right away. It was either Australia or Canada, and apparently a lot of immigrants had that same choice. I don't know why, but Australia or Canada was the choice, and my parents picked Canada. So I taught them English my whole life, like starting up. I knew it first. And it's interesting now because I'm thinking, will my kids know Tagalog? I barely know how to speak it by myself. And now I'm gonna have to learn that starting from scratch, or not starting from scratch, but I would love to get better at it because there are certain things, like we said, we like to express in Cantonese or in Tagalog, and I want my kids to be able to know that way of expression.
Yeah. I love the segue that we're getting into of navigating life as either Filipino Canadian, Chinese Canadian,
Mhm.
and whether you came here very young, later in life, or you're born here. Um, speaking to like what is it like to navigate living in a culture that is different from yours, but yet kind of all you ever knew?
That's
Yeah.
true. I don't know. It's so interesting because I think for a while, a lot of my friends were also, or they're born in Canada and their parents are immigrants. And it was really difficult because I had no family here. Um, my mom had a lot of her friends, though, from Philippines moved to Canada, and she found her longtime best friend in like our neighborhood, and I became really close to her son, who's the same age as me, and they didn't even know that the other moved to Canada. So it was kind of like fate that they met, and they actually met at the church. They're both Catholic, and they both went to church with their families and said, "Hey, I didn't know you moved to Canada," and it was really great. So they were kind of my family, and I kind of grew up with that generational difference, but finding friends that had immigrant parents were way closer to me than any of my other friends because I was able to come to their house, share their traditions. My best friend's Peruvian, my other one's Egyptian. They also have very strict baby boomer parents. So when we're talking about our parents, when we compare basically anything about our lives, it's very similar. And it's interesting because they have that conversation with their parents of, okay, well, do you want to try therapy? And oh, the same response. They're not interested. They're kind of like, why do you even think that we need therapy? And then when they start bringing up, religion, and maybe we can talk to someone who has like that openness about religion, who understands, and it really opens up the conversation just a little bit more. And yeah, I don't know. Is it ever, have you ever talked about maybe like religion with other friends and bringing it up with their parents?
Yeah. I think there's often in the Asian community, not just the Asian communities, but of the minority communities, the
Mhm.
place of worship is also a place for community, regardless of
Yes.
what your religion is. And so, yeah, I'd say that even growing up, we raised with a Christian background, did find a lot of connection with people who also went to church or were more specifically like Cantonese speaking. Um, I think being in Toronto, we're very lucky because we have such a large Asian population and such diversity of all
Mhm.
of the Asians that we are. And we can find a community somewhere. Um, but whether it's religion or strictness or cultural factors, I think that it still comes in contact with like um, and conflict with the more westernized way of life
Mhm.
versus the more Eastern way of life. And sometimes it can be really hard to um, kind of have one foot in each world
Mhm.
where you still want to be connected to your culture. You kind of have to be connected to your culture, especially if
It's
your
never
parents,
leaving you.
yeah, don't speak the language or haven't spent as much time in Canada.
Mhm.
But then also feeling the pull of wanting to fit in and doing the other stuff that everyone else is doing.
Mhm.
So that's a tension I see often in my own life for myself, as well as the clients that come in. Um, yeah, trying to fit into Western society model, but also within their own family culture. Yeah. What are
That's
your
so
thoughts on that?
interesting. Well, I love that you're mentioning like that one foot in each door type of thing where we have, well, we're not necessarily, I'm not mixed. You're not mixed either, I'm assuming. Yeah.
Mm-mm.
But we did grow up in a very Western society, and that feeling of, not white enough to be white and not Asian enough to be Asian.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like those fusion pizzas that you grew up with where I'm like,
Yeah.
which side am I on? I'm just like a pizza with some sweet potato, and I'm trying to figure out, where am I supposed to be? Who am I supposed to talk to?
Yeah.
And who do I relate to? And it's so interesting because I'm not really sure if you've been a therapist to like a kind of mixed couple. And I've seen that a lot where even myself, like I used to be with um, someone who's different from my background, and his traditions were so different from my own. His like when you meet an Asian family, we have this tradition where you have to bless them as a sign of respect. And you put your hand, base their hand on your forehead, and it's called like a blessing.
Yeah.
And I was so used to that type of I don't know, culture and that background. I've never been with anyone before. He was my first boyfriend. And it was kind of funny because when I came to his house, I didn't know what to do. I was like, do I shake their hand? Like, is that what I say? Do I have to bring a gift? Asians always bring gifts. They bring something. It's food mostly, or flowers. It has to be something.
Mm.
And all of my friends they're not only Asian, but they come from um, another background, either it was a Hispanic background or Egyptian background, where they have that same tradition. They bring something over. And he did not have that. I remember she was so surprised. His mom was like, "Oh, she brought me a gift." And I came, I shook her hand, I tried to be as polite and respectful, which was great to them. But when we started going out, he could be out till like 2 a.m. and they'd be fine with that. That is not Asian household time. You must be home early.
Yeah.
And that was crazy to me. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And I don't know, the differences in like a relationship when you see that and the culture shock is completely different, and it's so strange to experience. I don't know, have you ever seen that at couples? If you ever did couples
Yeah.
therapy?
Yeah, not couples therapy, but definitely clients coming in with
Oh,
who are in interracial or even intercultural relationships. I want to take a step back and comment on we're not we're not biracial, but sometimes I argue that we're like bicultural because
yes.
we've had to live in these two separate cultures. So just putting that out there, biculturality, I don't know.
I don't know. I understand though. It
Yeah,
definitely does make sense. And I do feel that way as well.
yeah. As for like interracial coupling or relationships, yeah, it is interesting. Like whether it was with friendships or romantic relationships, it's like, we call everybody auntie and uncle. And like,
Oh, yes,
like
you can do that
everybody's
all,
your auntie
and
and
you don't have to
uncle.
be related.
Yeah.
That's your uncle.
Even if it's your boyfriend's mom, they're still auntie. If they're Asian, they just
Mhm.
all understand everybody's auntie
Yes.
and uncle. But if they're not of some kind of Asian cultural background, you're just like, do I call them by their last name, by their
Oh, that
first
was so
name?
difficult for me.
What do I do?
Do I call them Mrs. and then last name, but then that's too formal?
Yeah.
So, oh, completely forgot about that, but that's interesting. I forgot about how to address them. And it's
And it,
always that same like coupling. I don't know, I've seen it a lot, but it's always Asian woman with a Caucasian man, which is what I've seen a lot. And I don't know, how does that look for an Asian man? Like you don't, it's always Asian man with Asian woman, but how come it's never the other way around?
I, I don't know what that is. But I would agree that like the majority of the time when you see an interracial couple, all the time, and I think we're beginning to see less, well, the majority of the time is the dominant culture, which in Canada, that's white, and a dominant culture male. So
Mhm.
in Canada, it's a white male with a minority or person of color woman, whether that's Indian, Asian, Chinese, Latin, or Hispanic.
Mhm.
Like it tends to skew that way. Well, I'm sure there's certain reasons around that,
I just don't know.
um, but we rarely see minority male
Mhm.
with a predominant culture female. I think in
Yeah.
Toronto, we see more of that than anywhere else,
For
just
sure.
because there is such a high number of BIPOC population here that there's a lot more intermingling of cultures.
Mhm.
Um, Sometimes also, I think females have an easier time assimilating into another culture.
For sure.
Yeah, versus males at times.
Hmm.
And at least speaking to Chinese culture, I think Asian men have a lot more pressure of maintaining like the family name and
Hmm.
by, trying to date within the race. So there's some unsaid pressures there, I think.
I completely agree. Like I said, I have a lot of, we call them family friends, basically, because we're so close to them. I've grown up with them, but they are no way blood related at all. But I consider him like my older brother. And I remember when he got his first girlfriend, she was Caucasian, and his mom was not happy about that at all. She was really concerned that, he was the oldest of all of us. And that was his role to find someone
Mhm.
within the who's Filipino. And it was crazy to me because I'm like, oh, be happy for him if you found someone that he likes and that likes him back. But I remember that, and I think I had that conversation with my mother, and I was like, do you want me to be with someone who's Filipino? And she actually had the opposite reaction. I think it was a joke when I was younger, but I always remembered it. She's like, well, you don't know because Filipino guy could be like your father. And that always scared me. I was like, why would you tell me that? I'm like, oh my gosh. So for a long time, I actually did not want to be with someone who was Filipino because of my mom's joke. But definitely for the eldest son, I've seen that a lot where they have to carry the family name. They have to be with someone within the race or the same background who knows the culture, who's respectful. And I don't know, that's a lot of pressure for them. Yeah, you're right. And, maybe them holding out is always something that they have underneath or lying under there when they're trying to meet someone new, which could be really difficult.
Yeah. I think there's also a lot of um social weight as well as like how Asian women can be fetishized
Oh
while
yeah.
Asian men don't have the same sex appeal, whether it's by media or otherwise, that
Hmm.
I think that they don't really get that credit that they deserve in
Hmm.
terms of desirability. Um, yeah, it's a shame because all men are awesome and beautiful and wonderful in their own way. But I think there is some cultural um, and social media
Stigma.
related stuff around
Hmm.
like how Asian men are viewed, and it's not fair. Um,
I have seen a big shift though for just because of Korean culture and like pop culture now. I've seen a huge shift of these like they're men out there and they're wearing eyeliner, they're wearing makeup and they're dancing and all these women are finding them so attractive and like I feel like we're kind of breaking a barrier there, like very slowly, obviously,
yeah,
but it's kind of interesting to see like I mean these are beautiful men and they're out there and they're doing their thing and it's amazing. It's kind of cool to see kind of some appreciation for Asian men
yeah.
out there. It's very slow, but it's
It's
coming.
happening. It's happening.
Yeah.
You're right. It is slow. We've been due, but we see that with Stephen Yoon and The Walking
Mhm.
Dead and
Oh, who's that one
Simu,
from?
Simu
Yes,
Liu
see,
and
he's going.
Shang-Chi.
Hmm.
Yeah, and Kim's Convenience. And it's,
Oh,
yeah,
what's that? A really popular movie. It was
Crazy
Crazy Rich
Rich.
Asians.
Yeah.
Yes, I feel like he's coming into other movies as well. He's kind of having more popularity there too. It's kind of
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. We're seeing them outside of like being that nerdy, kind of
Mhm.
awkward Asian or like the
Quiet
martial
one.
arts one.
Yes.
Well, Shang-Chi is a bit that, but they've definitely been stereotyped for
Of
sure.
course. Yeah. But it's
Yeah.
coming. We're getting our break there for those Asian men.
Yeah. And I don't know, I guess also when we're looking at like back to the interracial dating is finding that conflict within the different cultures
Mhm.
um, and how to navigate that as a team, whether that's preparing your partner who's coming into a culture that they're not familiar with, like bring the gift, or
Bless the
or
hands.
yeah, or find out how to address their parents beforehand. These
Mhm.
are all things that when you date within your culture, you like don't think about.
Of course.
Um,
You have to have that preparation conversation almost to be like, okay, this is how it's going to be with my family. This is just a sign of respect. So if you care about me and you want to do a little bit to, get along with my parents just a little bit more, I feel like that's a really important conversation. And,
yeah,
you want them to do well. They love you and they want to, show that they care. And this is a great way to help them out. They can't always this is stuff that you can't really Google sometimes.
yeah.
It's hard to find. So give them a break.
Yeah, Reddit
Give
might
them a
lead you
chance.
astray if you go
Yeah.
down the Reddit rabbit hole, but I think it's important to really have a beginner's mind to everything when you're in a interracial or intercultural relationship and not have the expectation that what comes easily to you might will come easily to them. And so I
Mhm.
think there's often more conversations to be had than you would otherwise.
Definitely.
So,
Yeah.
be patient with each other as you're learning each other's culture. And it's
Mhm.
also such a beautiful thing to share um, your culture and your family with one another.
Definitely. Yeah.
Thanks for joining us again on Spill the Tea. This is in celebration of Asian Heritage Month. I'm Monica.